it in spite of the warnings from the environmental, National Emergency Meteorological Services and all of that. The floods continue unabated and victims continue to suffer. Well, we have an environmentalist, Idowu Salau, right here in the studio with us. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
All right, let's try to reel out the numbers a bit. In Sokoto, 7,000 have been rendered homeless. And these are not just numbers. These are real human beings affected by the vagaries of nature. But then again, the question we've always asked, I mean, you've been here before, how much of it is human factor? How much of it is natural factor in such a way that we're able to determine how to respond to this problem?
I'm happy you said we should identify how much is human factor, and actually we'll say 50-50.
Okay.
Yes, let's just be modest. But once we know that this thing is natural, the human factor aspect of it is what we should look into. That's the one we can checkmate. That if flood is coming, you can't arrest flood immediately when it's coming, but you can prepare for it. I'll refer us back to some of the report, because Nigeria, we like to make report, we like to make committee. There's this committee on Vision 2010 report on environment that was made by previous administration. They mentioned in that report the role and responsibility of everybody, both the government, at local government level, at the private sector, NGO, federal government, state government, what they're supposed to do.
And yet,
are we looking at that report to even affect some of the recommendation of the report? No.
Maybe you should even let us into some of the recommendations of that report.
I'll give you an example.
Yes,
I'll give you an example. The strategies that they mentioned, that if you want to abate or you want to control flood, they have about from A to G of the strategies. Enforce compliance with town planning. That's one. Build embankment along the rivers, coastline prone to flood. Establish rainstorm early warning system. I think we have that. Establish and monitor weather station, river and tidal gauge. We don't have that. Ensure appropriate management of dams. Do we carry out maintenance on dams?
But in all of those, are these specifications? Which level of government, which organization handles?
There are some that are the dams are owned by federal government. So you expect federal government to carry out maintenance on their dams. Then what of the one of the planning and urban code? That one is state responsibility and local government. Now the one of awareness, the participation of the public itself. Why will people throw heavy waste into the drainage channel where water used to pass? As I was just coming to the station, it's sad. I don't know who are the head of research and development of Ministry of Environment in Lagos State. Look at that Odoyala Road. It's covered. I think the only thing you see could not be more than maybe 500 meters or 1 meter of water flowing. The entire riverbank is covered with weeds and solid waste. And that is the channel that takes all the storm water from Ikorodu Road and some coming from Ogba, Agege, all those areas. That's the storm water that takes into the lagoon.
There.
So when we say natural 50%, man-made 50%, in fact, I would say natural 40%, 60% is man-made. Wow. Because we violated all these aspects of man-made infrastructure facility we are supposed to put in place. Nobody is taking care of that.
Okay. At the beginning of the year, when Nigeria Meteorological Agency, through its DG Professor Sani Mashi, was telling Nigerians that about 35 states of the Federation will be affected. And in these 35 states, about 380 local governments will be critically affected. It means that there has been, earmarking, in fact, simplifying or narrowing down to the specifics of where and where these can. But in all of that, after that, what happened? Nothing else. But if we have to look at the ideals as to what should be done, what should it really? How should Nigeria handle it or take it up from there after the warnings have been put out there or the advisory, for instance?
It's not that we need a rocket science before we can control flood. We know that this thing will happen. We've got the early warning. Now, how many of the state government have in place this flood management plan of each cities? How many of them preserve or provide money to maintain the floodplain area? And if you look at the terrain, most of the major cities in Nigeria of today, we are flat terrain. Yeah, flat plain. Then the kind of flood that are coming, Lagos is susceptible to 3 of those major floods that we have. River flooding, urban flooding, and coastal flooding.
Wow.
Those 3 are, and if you look at the level of mainland to the river, and you talk of Victoria Island, the Surulere axis, the Ikeja axis, the level of the island and the water level to the sea, you compare those things and you see that governments would start planning on how to arrest urban flooding when it comes. Look at Katsina. Katsina, within just flash flood of 5 hours or 6 hours, 6,000 houses devastated. 58 people lost their life.
same
Nobody
as,
has come
Kaduna,
out to say, have they done post-impact assessment study of that rain, of the rainstorm that happened that time? Look at 2012 in Nigeria, when we have the highest, at least I would say one of the most devastating flood. Yes,
yeah.
We lost close to I think from record, 20 million people displaced. Are you getting me? Then we have houses destroyed. We lost 300 lives in 2012. All this should be, somebody should be looking at that. Is that the way we should be losing life in Nigeria, when we can protect our environment and reduce?
So whatever
the
lessons
carnage
that should have been gained from that experience have not really been...
Okay, look at the 2016 flooding on Victoria Island last year.
Yes.
I don't know if School of Oceanography has taken the data of the rainfall so that we will be able to prepare for future occurrence. The quantum of water that fell that period, who is taking the data? Because we have never experienced such flooding on Lekki-Ajah Express Road before.
Yeah.
So if somebody has taken the data, how many hours does the rain fall? What volume of water do you think what happened to the drainage channel along the Lekki-Ajah Expressway? Have they been expanded since that time?
Of course not.
So,
now, in the case of, I mean, when we say about 300 and something local governments will be affected by this floods in Nigeria, that's more than half of the 774 local government areas that we have already.
We're not even 774 again after Bakassi.
After Bakassi, so we're talking about 773. Now, if we know that this is what happens every year, and you have meteorological services warnings and all of that, you expect that state governments, federal and local governments would actually put some proactive measures in place rather than just telling people to move from the lowlands to the highlands. In the case of Kaduna, for example, many of the victims are like, look, yes, we did hear, you know, governments telling us to move to safe areas, but where really do we go to? I mean, you would expect that state governments, for example, would be able to provide some kind of temporary shelter for these people, rather than leaving it, you know, for them to move to primary schools and all of that. Thankfully, the schools are on holidays now, but they'll soon be back. So when the schools resume, what then?
Don't forget, we are in August break. The last part of the rain will start as from end of this week. And you know, we should be bracing up to see what we can do.
Flooding.
So I give you an example of what state government and federal government need to do. I participated in a project in Ilorin. Asa River divided Ilorin into 2. When we were growing up in Ilorin that time, it used to overflow its bank. The people around Amilegbe, the part of the downstream where the river passed through, this used to be overflowing. But during that time, we have the people with political will, state government with political, we approached the federal government through the Ecological Fund, through the Ministry of Environment, and they came up with a design on how to channelize the river
Okay.
That started in 2012. I participated in that project. Ecological Fund funded it. And the project has been completed. From 2014 or 15 that the project was completed, there is no single overflooding in that area any longer. No more loss of life, no more loss of property. In fact, property that have been abandoned, they came back because if imagine a 1,000 kilometers of concrete wall embankment, 4 meters down, that is the dredging level, the silt that they remove. But if you go back there now, after a year we added over the project, they started throwing garbage on the river channel again.
Wow.
So who is monitoring it? The federal government has spent their own money to do this thing for the state government. The state government is supposed to do the maintenance dredging of the river. You don't have to wait until it's silted up again. So these are the kind of synergy we will expect between federal, state, and local government. And that's why I would suggest that all the ecological funds they are collecting, they don't need to wait until strategy happens before they say they are now looking for which way to do. Then Lagos
Put
State,
measures in place.
Lagos State should do something serious about the solid waste management problem. Because when the flood in Lagos will come, you won't just see ordinary water. So it's coming with
waste,
always being eaten.
Yeah.
So it will be different. And you still remember we saw that when the whole street in Surulere
filled with
plastic and all these things.
Yeah.
That is the kind of what we have now, because just it's sending a signal to the state government that we don't have adequate waste management system in place right now.
Okay.
Because we have to do something on that.
In some states, apart from Lagos, for instance, we often have people have attachment to lands.
Yeah.
Where there is an advisory to say, evacuate or relocate from this place to somewhere else. And then people have this attachment, very strong attachment to land, where they feel if I relocate maybe for the period of rain, maybe 1 month, 2 months, by the time I come back, it's not I'm going to find someone else on the land.
Yes,
How does that complicate this issue?
If there's infrastructure on the land, what I always advise the government is that take the bull by the horn. We did it when we were doing the channelization of Asa River. We marked some of it that on the right of way of the river. We first gave them 20 meter right of way of the river. We found out we would demolish a lot of, then the impact will be reduced if we move a little bit closer than this and that. When we give them 10 meter, they still refuse to go. Then we give them 5 meter, they refuse to go. Then we give them 2 meter right of way, they refuse to go. Then all those within the 2 meter right of way, we cleared everything. And now they are enjoying it because of what we did. So governments will invest in infrastructure. It's not just only road infrastructure. That is my own problem. Have you seen where flood happened? The entire road infrastructure that you put in place will be washed away if there is no proper drainage channel within minutes and seconds. And that's why we expert in the environment, we keep advising government as you are planning for road infrastructure, building infrastructure. Look at how you take care of the storm.
But in the case you just cited, was there any kind of compensation, monetary compensation?
Of course,
there were for the people. But because really, that's the one way that you can actually encourage them.
And the problem, most of them don't have legal paper.
There you go.
Yes, that is it. Well, the only one person that has legal paper is the COO, backdated, maybe dated maybe 1972 or 74, and he's an old man. And we are still working on this compensation till now. In
the case of Kaduna, for example, some of the victims actually complained that the helplines that were provided in the case of this, eventualities, that the helplines don't even work.
So that's
another problem.
Yeah, that's another problem.
And even the same number of victims too complained that they didn't even hear at all on radio, on TV, that there was any such threat of flooding coming.
We have to ask the local government, local government authority, and the state government authority that they need to step up their game in this regard, because lack of information leads to a lot of things that we don't expect. So most of the time, we need information to get across. Look at what Lagos State is doing about information on flood. Giving awareness to people here and there. That's enough. I give kudos to them in that area. But it's not only awareness. You must meet up the challenges. We have a greater challenges that is awaiting.
And the awareness should be continuous.
The awareness should be continuous so that more people, and that's exactly what helped that of 2017 in Lekki and Ajah axis. Because the people are informed, they got the information, those coming in, because the rain started in the night. And that's what saved life. They will have run into it. So they were hearing it on the radio. So I give the emergency response unit of Lagos State government kudos for that.
But as it is right now, does it look like the government is highly overwhelmed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I believe by the grace of God, we were still working to discuss with the Ecological Fund Office to convoke a kind of national summit. Summit, whereby all the stakeholders will come in and discuss the issue. In fact, the issue of ecological fund, assessing it, they should relax on it. The way they are doing it is not what it should be politicized. It should be something that any state government that want to assess it, even though they have their own. Federal government has their own share of the ecological fund. But you see, somebody should be monitoring the share that is coming to the state government. How do you administer it? How do you use it?
And speaking of which, does government at any level, whether federal, state or local government, even interface with environmental experts like yourself to be able to find ways of solving or preventing this problem?
It's easy to interface. You see, what if you give advice and they don't need to the advice?
Okay, that's
like federal government, we consult for them regularly. Sometimes we used to consult for Lagos State, Kwara State, Edo State. We have consultation on a regular basis with them. But the question is, what they keep saying, where is the fund? Yes, lack of fund. But forgetting that the fund you are pumping into
ecological
other infrastructure, you need to put attention into that too.
Same thing.
Yes, exactly, because they both have to go pari passu. They have to go.
We have to leave it here now. Time is against us, but we must thank you, Idou Salau, environmentalist, for joining us on the program.